This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there, as we are getting set for a big game coming up tonight between the Miami Heat and Phoenix Suns, a finals preview, as Big O has already predicted that this is what we're going to see coming up in June. But Ira, I thought you brought up a good point before we crossed over here, and that's that the game against Cleveland coming up is bigger because you're looking at tiebreakers. And at this point, you can look at Phoenix and say, all right, man, we'd love for some miracle to happen. And if we do end up playing them, and I'd say we, if you're a Heat fan, if the Heat do end up playing them in the finals, you'd love to find a way to catch them. But that's just not realistic at this point. So let's look at the Eastern Conference, because what we saw last week with this team, you called it Hell Week. The Heat were calling it Exam Week on their broadcast. I think if you wanted to give them a grade on that exam, you had said at the end of last week's program, you said if they found a way to win one out of those last three, you'd feel pretty good about things. If they found a way to win two out of those last three, you'd feel really good about things. Despite the fact they slipped a little bit at the end of that Milwaukee game, they won 2 out of 3. So your take from Exam Week / Hell Week, Ira, was what?
I would give them an A, and I know you could say, well, wait a minute, that's only a 75% on the test. They lost one in Milwaukee, but they lost by 1, and they made a statement. And after they left Milwaukee, even though the Bucks escaped some questionable calls there at the end, the Bucks had their full attention. The Bucks knew that going into a playoff series, this would not be easy. So I think they accomplished everything they wanted. They came out with a comfortable 3-game lead in the Eastern Conference after the victory over Philadelphia. And as the schedule winds down, 3 means a lot. They have a chance now to clinch the tiebreaker against the 76ers. They basically have all the tiebreakers, Clay, for this reason. We know they're 3-0 against the Bulls with 1 to go. That's taken care of. They're 2-1 against Philadelphia. But even if they lose in Philadelphia 2 weeks from yesterday, they still have the better conference record. Plus, they have a chance to win the division. A division title could impact in there also. So when you look through all the tiebreakers going down the line there, they're in good position because their conference record, they're like plus 13 in the Eastern Conference wins over losses. So that positions themselves very well. That's all you want to do. You want to be in a good place in the standings. You want to be in a good place in the tiebreaker. You want to value the more valuable games. And there still are more exams. It's just not exam week. There still is a game in Chicago. There still is a game in Philadelphia. You still have those matchups that you have to play out. There's a game in Boston. So we'll see that also. I just think it's really interesting, and I know they mentioned this on the Inside the NBA yesterday when they were talking about it after, I think it was Turner's game yesterday. If the Heat wind up at number 1, and you get Brooklyn playing Toronto in the 7-8 game, I would think the Heat are going to be rooting quietly, not saying anything, really hard for Brooklyn to win that game, to go up to 7. They never would say it because that would be disrespecting Toronto, of course. So it's almost like I think we're going to be turning eventually to watching the Heat games into scoreboard watching, where either you want the Nets to, to wind up getting to number 6 if possible, and Cleveland's a little shaky. They have the Jared Allen finger injury right now. They're not their full team. So I think we're going to be watching the rest of those standing as well. But last week went very well. The Heat came back home. They showed their strength again. They took care of we spoke about this earlier in the year, Clay, the games you can't let get away, the games against the bad teams. And even, I think you would agree with this, Clay, and then I'll leave it up to you. Even after the Heat were down 13 in the first half against the Rockets, I know I was sitting there and going, they'll be up by double digits by the third quarter. You just saw that coming. That's the difference in this season's Heat. You take care of the little ones, the Rockets game in the past. Next week, you're going to have the Pistons. You're going to have the Thunder. Take care of those. You'll build your resume, and no one will be catching you in the East.
Guys, make sure to hit the like button for us, or smash the like button, as Big O would say, and make sure to drop your questions, your comments. We're going to get to them as we go along. I know you got a lot of thoughts on Victor Oladipo. I do as well, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But to your point, it's always driven me nuts at the end of the season with some of the more recent Heat teams, where you look at the standings and where they ended up seated, and you could pick out games against a terrible Knicks team, games against the Magic, games against the Hawks before they turned good. I mean, there were always the Washington. There was always like 4, 5, 6 games that you looked at the schedule and you're like, man, how did you let that slip? If you had won one of those, it would have been the difference between you fighting for 6 or 7 spot and being up 4 or 5 spot in the always jumbled Eastern Conference. This year, they'll have those lulls at the beginning of the game like they did the other night, but they find a way to fight through them against the bad teams. It's like eventually the defense tightens its screws, and it
Yeah,
felt like they
they
were.
know they're the frickin' Miami Heat, and they turn
Yeah,
into that.
yeah, and it's like they know that their defensive intensity is going to be such that eventually it's going to change them. And by the way, Tyler Hero, I don't know if that game would have changed quite as quickly. It may have been a little bit more touch and go in the third quarter had Tyler Hero not single-handedly pulled him out of that at the end of the second quarter. I mean, what he did, but having somebody like him to come off the bench and do what he did, it gives you that extra tool in the toolbox when you do have to make up those deficits. And I think you and I have talked about this, that come playoff time, there are going to be moments that are going to have to be Tyler Hero moments. And when he does things like that, even if it's against a bad Houston Rockets team, when he does things like that, I think it just gives you more confidence that when the games really do matter and really do get big, he's not going to be, the moment is not going to be too big for him. We've seen him rise to that occasion time and time again.
And tangentially there, we know that Tyler's the runaway winner already of Sixth Man of the Year, the Sixth Man Award. I think you would agree with that, Clay. There's no competition. Kelly Oubre is putting up meaningless numbers on a bad team.
Right.
Clay, my question to you is this. This was discussed early in the year and then not so much when Tyler had some uneven moments. Why is he not either at the top of or heavily involved in the discussion for most improved player? Yes, he was very good as a rookie. Then he, that sort of up and down, roller coaster. He was very nominal as a second-year player. Didn't have the offseason, didn't have the break, went from the bubble, season started right away. The improvement in Tyler Hero's game from wildly and maddeningly inconsistent to what he is now, the jump from 2021 to 2021-22.
Yep.
I mean, I even wonder statistically if there's other players in the league who have made as much of a jump. I know there's guys like Fred VanVleet who went from a supporting player to Kyle Lowry to a leading man in Toronto. There's a bunch of other guys also. But I think Tyler deserves votes there as well, because I think he is also one of the most improved players in the NBA this season as well.
Certainly, and to be completely honest, I haven't scoped kind of the landscape to who else may even be on that list. You know what I mean? And because I think we've been so focused on the sixth man, you might be right. I think to your point about sixth man, I want to bring this back to Victor Oladipo.
Sure.
What I love is Tyler Hero he's able to do a lot of things now, especially offensively, but that role is defined with him. It's, man, he's going to come off the bench, he's going to score for you, and then you kind of read the matchups down the stretch. And you see, like, all right, if you're getting late in fourth quarter and you need somebody to get a bucket, you're going to go to him. So Victor Oladipo slides into that backcourt spot, the other backcourt spot there. And, it hurt a little bit to see Gabe Vincent kind of relegated to end of game with a 30-point lead guy. But unfortunately, that's kind of where we are and where we knew we would be when Victor Oladipo came back. And it's a good thing because it means Vic is back. And so when you're talking about bringing Tyler Hero off the bench along with the Victor Oladipo, Barry Jackson said this the other day, and I agree with him. Tyler Hero and Victor Oladipo, if Vic plays like he did the other night, the Heat's backcourt coming off the bench may be as good or better than a number of starting backcourts around the league. Not your better starting backcourts, better teams, but some of the lower end NBA teams.
I totally agree. There's points I sit there in FTX Arena and I can't wait till the reserves come in. I mean, even the Houston game, I was sitting there was going, okay, just need Tyler. When's Tyler coming in? Where's Tyler?
Yes.
And now, and of course, the buzz with Vic as we go along. By the way, I don't know if Sean, if it's too late for him to change the logo at the top of our YouTube screen, but if we could change it to Inside the Oladipo with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro, because, man, Clay, can you recall, I know there's the backup quarterback syndrome where you want to see the guy who's not in there all the time, but this is not a buzz of a day or a week or a month leading up to, Victor coming back. This was a buzz of 11 months of waiting for that moment, and you could feel the pent-up energy. So right now, when Tyler checks in, there's an elevation at FTX Arena. Oh, boy, it's going to get fun now. God bless Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler and their very efficient play. But this guy's either going to do something really good or really awful, but nothing in between. And then you wait a couple more guys. Okay, Deadman. Okay, Caleb Martin. There he is. There's Victor Oladipo. All of a sudden, it makes it interesting. You almost can excuse the late arrivers at FTX Arena because I've seen the starters and Duncan and those guys. I'm here for the Tyler and the Oladipo. And man, was that fun the other night on Monday.
There was a moment where he took the charge on one end of the floor, and you had the chance of Oladipo, and then he made the scoop on the other end. And I mean, there were legit goosebumps. There really were. And it's rare. You have to like hold on to those moments, right? Especially in the NBA regular season, because you and I have talked about this. The regular season is the regular season. Jimmy Butler is bored. I mean, like
Yes.
you can these guys. I remember talking to Chris Bosh about this, and this was right after I got here. That big three team, they got bored. They got to the point where the regular season was just kind of and I feel like that's kind of where Jimmy Butler is at this point, and he will never say that. But look, you've talked about this, that's when he's going to take over, is in the big games, in the playoffs. That's when you can expect to see late game Jimmy Butler. It's rare that you get those like meaningful goosebump type moments in the regular season. And we got one the other night with Victor Oladipo, and that was really cool. And it was hearing him talk about it after the game and the comeback and all that. It felt like you could see his confidence in his body grow as the game went along. And in that moment where you have the crowd chanting, he takes the charge, he goes and scores on the other end of the floor. It was like everything everybody had been waiting for, it somehow surpassed that moment. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, no, it's like I've been writing stories for days on end, just posted another one right now about the 15-minute limit and how every single game, and there were only 4, that Vic came back last season, he played way more than 15 minutes. He was in the 30s, Clay, a couple of times, and that was with a gimpy bad leg. You can also see how this is different. Last season was a test drive. The Heat didn't even know if Vic was coming back in free agency or not. That was a later rather than sooner decision on the minimum deal, telling him, hey, we can get you back to bird rights in 2 years. So he didn't feel like part of the family. But the fact that we saw all these practices and we saw the workout in Toronto when he played the 2-on-2 and the Heat showed that on their pregame show, and we kept hearing there's been more, and then he went to Sioux Falls. It's been the whole buildup that you can understand now. The Heat realize they have something. Number one, they have something in Vic. Number two, they have something and a chance to play deep into June. So even though we're in March right now, and you might have said this was the ultimate limit to get the guy back, why isn't he playing more? They're still going to ramp him up because I think Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, and Andy Ellisberg do see Victor Oladipo in late April and in May and hopefully in June as well. So they're still taking this long view. I mean, I was surprised when I wrote the story I just posted at the Sun Sentinel about the 15-minute limit. I thought last year's minutes were short. They were not.
Yeah.
He went at least 20 in each game. He went 30 in 2 games. He was just thrown into the fire. And I think they learned a lesson from that. Sometimes slow and steady is the way to win this race. And that's the approach right now. On one hand, if you're a fan, if Victor gets rolling, you don't want it to stop. On the other hand, you appreciate it. We've seen a ton of teams come into FTX Arena, the players coming back after a layoff, maybe even Devin Booker tonight, and you want to pace the guy. And it's like Big O said at the top of the show, when you mentioned with Chris Bosh talking about the big three, there is a longer view this year. I'm not sure there was last year. There was sort of bubble frauds. Is it real? We got to win the first round. I think this year they'll never say it. But I think this year the Heat are taking the look of May and June as well. And at the top of the Eastern Conference, they have every right to do that.
And so with Victor Oladipo, we're going to kind of make the differentiation between there was that one moment, and by the one moment, I mean that game. And then I also want to spin it forward and see, okay, what does this mean with him moving forward? But I want to go back a little bit because you talked about the test drive situation with Vic. And what I found interesting with the whole Victor Oladipo courtship, if you want to call it that, I think, Bam Adebayo is one of these guys that, like, man, he's everybody's best friend. Like, if you see him out there, and I'm sure you've seen this, the way other teams' stars and coaches react to him post-game, and, like, everybody loves Bam. He's like the mayor of the – and so I think when you saw him and Victor Oladipo talking at the end of games, remember in the bubble, there was like kind of this, everybody would joke about the flirtation, whatever, between the Heat and Victor Oladipo. But then when it got kind of serious, I think you saw some of these reports, and I don't know if you independently reported this, Ira, but there were some questions within the Heat organization about, hey, do we really want to bring in somebody who's out there kind of openly flirting with other teams while he's on the Indiana Pacers roster? There was like kind of like this awkward, man, he's a part of the Pacers. And he's clearly, because there were these whispers that he would go up to players, not just on the Heat, but I think also maybe the Knicks, and say, hey, I want to come play with you. Like,
Yes.
and so there was kind of this where I think they liked what they knew of Victor Oladipo, but there was also that, okay, well, what's the deal with this wanting to be somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. So then we go back to the other night. And, you mentioned kind of this test drive situation. It wasn't just Victor Oladipo, the player, the physical, is he going to be it was Victor Oladipo, the person. It was, we need to get to know him. We need to get to know if he's somebody that we want to commit to long term. And we probably still don't know that, because I think there's going to be a physical side of this that plays into it. But when I saw Eric Spoelstra after the game, and I think you actually asked me about this, Ira, about that special moment in the locker room where they kind of either gave him the game ball or called him player of the game,
yeah.
whatever it was. It was like everything had come full circle, and any questions that people in the organization may have had about him, they were all answered because of the 11 months of work that he put in for that night. And so it's just kind of like this whole story arc. It was like there was one ending the other night, but then now it's a beginning leading towards what's next. How does he help this team as they hope to go to the NBA Finals and hopefully win a championship,
Clay,
but also his future here?
He was humbled. And once you're humbled, it's different.
Yes.
He was humbled by having to have surgery again. He was humbled when he got to the free agent market. There was nothing out there for him but the absolute veterans minimum. He was humbled by the Heat saying you have to work your way back. He was humbled by taking 2 flights, I assume connecting, to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to have to work there also. So he went through all of those steps. That changes a man when you've been through all that. I think that's why there was that unbelievable ebullient smile and effervescence he had out there, because he was humbled. In Indiana, he was an all-star. He was third-team All-NBA. He was, hey, you want me, you got to pay for me. I'm Vic, I'm the man. And then I think that changed him a little bit. He also was appreciative that the Heat stood by him. And other teams might have thrown him in the fire earlier and said, screw it, he's a free agent at the end of the year. We'll burn out the last remaining cartilage he has, in that knee. We'll strain that quadricep. We don't give a crap. He's gone anyway. The Heat took the other approach, even with Vic and a pending free agent. Even with Vic having every right to go somewhere else for the Knicks or someone else's cap space and clearly out sort of pacing the Heat's market, that the Heat still stood with him and said, whatever it is, whether it's a month, whether it's 2 months, whether it's to the Eastern Conference Finals, the NBA Finals, we'll stick with you now. We'll worry about later. I think that humbled him also. I think he found the right place. He could have been lost in the Oasis if he would have stayed in Houston or gone to another team that wasn't willing to make an 11-month investment.
So if you have any more questions, drop them in the chat. We could do the entire show on Victor Oladipo. We really could. And we'll talk more about him as it goes along. I want to kind of spin this forward with him. Where does his role kind of play out here as we talk about the rotation moving forward? Again, it's unfortunate you saw Gabe Vincent at the end, but that's kind of where I think we're going to be at moving forward. How does he help this team get to the next level? And then I also want to talk about kind of the aftermath of this exam week, which is how do the Heat match up with these contenders in the Eastern Conference? And now that we've kind of seen James Harden in Philadelphia, in the role, not in the game down here, but we kind of see how he's going to play there, and then kind of project out with Ben Simmons in Brooklyn. Now that we've kind of been able to see some of these teams, where do the Heat stack up now? We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
You're listening